Marcus Blackwood stood at the edge of the cemetery, watching the mahogany casket being lowered into the earth. His hands remained steady at his sides, but his heart hammered against his ribs like a caged bird desperate to escape. The morning mist clung to the headstones around him, and the scent of fresh roses from the funeral arrangements mixed with the damp soil beneath his polished Italian leather shoes. He hadn't spoken to Rebecca in 3 years, not since their divorce papers were finalized in that sterile conference room downtown. Yet, here he was, paying his respects to the woman who had once shared his dreams of building a family together. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The pastor's voice droned on about eternal rest and heavenly peace, but Marcus found himself lost in memories that felt both distant and painfully fresh. He remembered the countless doctor's appointments, the failed treatments, the nights Rebecca cried herself to sleep, believing it was somehow her fault. The specialists had been clear from the beginning. The problem wasn't with her. Marcus was the one whose body had failed them, whose dreams of fatherhood would never come to pass. The irony wasn't lost on him that he could build a financial empire worth hundreds of millions, yet he couldn't give the woman he loved the one thing money couldn't buy. The funeral attendees began to disperse as the service concluded, their black umbrellas creating a sea of shadows against the grey October sky. Marcus turned to leave, his conscience finally at peace, knowing he had honored Rebecca's memory, when a small voice cut through the murmur of conversations around him. "Excuse me, mister." Marcus looked down to see 2 identical children standing before him, their hands clasped together as if drawing strength from each other. The boy and girl couldn't have been older than 7, with Rebecca's striking green eyes and the same stubborn cowlick in their dark hair that she used to complain about every morning. They wore matching black outfits that looked slightly too large for their small frames, and their faces held a solemnity that seemed far too mature for their age. "Are you Marcus?" the little girl asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as he stared at the children. They looked exactly like Rebecca had when she was young, based on the childhood photos she used to show him during their happier days. His throat went dry, and for a moment he couldn't find his voice. When he finally managed to speak, the words came out hoarse and strained. "How do you know my name?" The boy stepped forward, his grip tightening on his sister's hand. "Mommy told us all about you. She said you were the kindest man she ever knew and that you would take care of us if anything ever happened to her." The world seemed to tilt beneath Marcus's feet. He looked around frantically, searching for an adult who might claim these children, but the cemetery was rapidly emptying. The few remaining mourners were too far away to be connected to the twins standing before him. His mind raced through possibilities, each one more impossible than the last. "Who are you?" he managed to ask, though part of him already dreaded the answer. "I'm Emma," the girl said softly, "and this is my brother Ethan. We're Rebecca's children." Marcus felt as if he'd been struck by lightning. The cemetery around him faded into a blur as he struggled to process what he was hearing. Rebecca had children, twins. Children who looked exactly like her, who knew his name, who were now staring up at him with those familiar green eyes that had haunted his dreams for years. "That's impossible," he whispered, more to himself than to the children. "Rebecca couldn't have children. We tried for years. The doctors said—" Emma's small hand reached out and touched his arm with a gentleness that reminded him so painfully of her mother. "Mommy was very sick before she died. She made us promise to find you and give you this." Ethan pulled a sealed envelope from his jacket pocket, the paper slightly crumpled from his small hands. Marcus stared at it as if it might explode. His name written across the front in Rebecca's familiar handwriting. The sight of those carefully formed letters brought back a flood of memories. Love notes hidden in his briefcase, birthday cards with heartfelt messages, and the final divorce papers she had signed with that same pen. With trembling fingers, Marcus took the envelope and tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and as he read the first few lines, his legs nearly gave out beneath him. "My dearest Marcus, if you are reading this, then I'm gone, and our children have found you as I instructed them to. I know this must come as a shock, and I pray you can forgive me for keeping them from you all these years. The twins are yours, Marcus. They have always been yours." The letter fluttered in the breeze as Marcus's hands shook uncontrollably. He read the words again, then a third time, but they remained unchanged. "Our children. They have always been yours." The implications crashed over him like a tsunami, drowning him in confusion, anger, and a desperate hope he didn't dare acknowledge. "Sir, are you all right?" Emma's concerned voice seemed to come from very far away. Marcus looked down at the children, his children if Rebecca's letter was to be believed, and saw his own reflection staring back at him. Now that he knew to look for it, he could see traces of himself in their features. Ethan had his nose, and Emma's smile was identical to one he saw in the mirror every morning. How had he missed it? How had Rebecca hidden this from him? "Where have you been living?" he asked, his voice cracking with emotion. "With Grandma Helen," Ethan replied matter-of-factly. "But she's in the hospital now. The doctors say she might not come home." Marcus's heart clenched as he realized these children, his children, were essentially orphans. Rebecca was gone, and now their caregiver was hospitalized. They were alone in the world, except for him. A man they had never met, whose existence as their father was only just being revealed. "Where are you staying now?" he managed to ask. Emma and Ethan exchanged a look that seemed to communicate volumes. "Mrs. Patterson from Child Services said we might have to go to a temporary home until they find us a family," Emma said quietly. "But Mommy said you would want us. She said you always wanted children." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Rebecca was right. He had always wanted children. The inability to have them had been the greatest disappointment of his life, the shadow that had darkened even his most successful business ventures. And now, standing in this cemetery with the autumn wind whipping around them, he was learning that he had been a father all along. "When were you born?" he asked, though he was already calculating the timeline in his head. "January 15th, they said in unison, a habit that must have developed from their close bond. Marcus closed his eyes as the math confirmed what he already knew. January 15th was exactly 9 months after the last time he and Rebecca had been together before their separation. She had known she was pregnant when she left him, had hidden it from him for reasons he couldn't begin to understand. The sound of footsteps on gravel made him look up. A woman in a grey suit was approaching, her expression businesslike, but not unkind. She had the look of someone who had delivered difficult news many times before. "Mr. Blackwood?" she asked, extending her hand. "I'm Patricia Patterson from Social Services. I believe you've met Emma and Ethan." Marcus shook her hand automatically, his mind still reeling from the revelations of the past few minutes. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm afraid there's been some confusion. These children claim to be your children." "Yes," she said gently. "Rebecca Blackwood contacted our office several weeks before her death. She provided documentation, including DNA test results that confirm paternity. She was very thorough in her preparations." The world spun around Marcus as he tried to process this information. Rebecca had not only known she was dying, but had taken steps to ensure the children would find their way to him. She had planned this moment, orchestrated this meeting in a cemetery while mourners filed past her grave. "I don't understand," he said weakly. "Why didn't she tell me sooner? Why keep them hidden all these years?" Mrs. Patterson's expression softened slightly. Perhaps that's a conversation better had in private. The children have been through enough today. Would you be willing to come to my office so we can discuss the arrangements? Marcus looked down at Emma and Ethan, who were watching him with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. They were strangers to him, yet they carried half his DNA. They were Rebecca's final gift and perhaps her cruelest joke. They represented everything he had ever wanted and everything he had been denied. "What happens to them if I don't?" he began, then stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "They would enter the foster care system," Mrs. Patterson said simply. Rebecca hoped that wouldn't be necessary. Emma tugged on Marcus's coat sleeve, drawing his attention back to her upturned face. "Mommy said you were sad because you couldn't have babies. She said that's why you got divorced, but we're here now, and we don't have anywhere else to go." The innocence in her voice, the matter-of-fact way she delivered information that turned his entire world upside down, left Marcus speechless. These children knew more about his marriage than most people, understood the pain that had driven him and Rebecca apart, and were offering themselves as the solution to a problem he thought could never be solved. "She also said you live in a really big house with a swimming pool," Ethan added, with the first hint of excitement Marcus had seen from either child. "Is that true?" Despite everything, Marcus found himself smiling. "Yes, it's true." "Could we see it?" Emma asked hopefully. "Mrs. Patterson said we might be able to visit before we have to go to the temporary home." Marcus looked at Mrs. Patterson, who nodded encouragingly. "It would be good for them to see where you live, to start getting acquainted. This is all very overwhelming for everyone involved." The drive to Marcus's estate passed in a surreal silence. The twins sat in the back seat of his Mercedes, their eyes wide as they took in the luxury of leather seats and climate control. Marcus found himself glancing in the rearview mirror every few seconds, still struggling to believe they were real. Their presence filled the car with an energy he had never experienced, a sense of completeness he hadn't realized he was missing. The house that greeted them at the end of the winding driveway was a testament to Marcus's success. The modern architectural masterpiece sat on 10 acres of manicured grounds, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered views of the surrounding mountains. Marcus had built it with Rebecca in mind, designing spaces for the family they had planned to create together. Now, years later, that family was finally arriving in a way he never could have imagined. "It's like a castle," Emma breathed as they pulled up to the front entrance. "Can we really stay here?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with wonder. Marcus turned in his seat to face them, his heart breaking at the hope in their young faces. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "There are a lot of things we need to figure out first." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Mrs. Patterson had followed them in her own car, and now she approached with a folder full of documents. "The children's belongings are still at Helen Morrison's house," she explained as they walked toward the front door. "She's Rebecca's mother. In case you weren't aware, she's been their primary caregiver since Rebecca's condition worsened." Marcus felt another stab of guilt. He hadn't even known Rebecca's mother was ill, hadn't been part of any family updates or medical decisions. 3 years of silence stretched between him and the life Rebecca had built without him. The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior, with high ceilings, marble floors, and artwork that had cost more than most people's homes. But as Marcus watched Emma and Ethan take in their surroundings, he saw the space through different eyes. It was beautiful but cold, a showcase rather than a home. There were no toys scattered on the floors, no family photos on the mantels, no signs that a life full of love and laughter had ever existed within these walls. "Do you have any kids' stuff?" Emma asked, her small voice echoing in the grand foyer. "No," Marcus admitted. I've never had children before." The twins exchanged another one of their meaningful looks. "Mommy said you wanted kids really bad," Ethan said. "She said it made you both very sad when you couldn't have them." Marcus knelt down to their eye level, studying their faces intently. Rebecca's eyes, his nose, her stubborn chin, his thick eyebrows. They were a perfect blend of both parents, living proof of a love that had created something beautiful, even as it was falling apart. "Your mother was right," he said softly. "I did want children very badly. I still do." "Then why don't you just keep us?" Emma asked with the simple logic of a 7-year-old. "We don't have parents anymore, and you don't have kids. It seems like it would work out perfectly." If only it were that simple, Marcus thought. But even as his mind raced through the complications, legal proceedings, lifestyle changes, the fact that he knew nothing about raising children, his heart was already making the decision. These children were his flesh and blood, his connection. To Rebecca, his chance at the family he had always dreamed of. Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we should discuss the practical matters while the children explore a bit. The house is certainly large enough for them to stay busy for a while." Marcus nodded, then turned back to the twins. "There's a game room upstairs, and yes, the pool is in the back. Just don't go outside without an adult, okay?" The children nodded solemnly, then headed toward the curved staircase with the careful steps of kids who had been taught to respect other people's homes. Marcus watched them go, his chest tight with an emotion he couldn't name. "They're remarkable children," Mrs. Patterson observed, "very mature for their age. But that's often the case when children have dealt with serious illness in the family. Rebecca was sick for almost 2 years before she passed." 2 years, Marcus repeated, the timeline hitting him like a sledgehammer. "She was sick for 2 years, and I never knew." According to the children, she didn't want to burden anyone. She was very private about her condition, even with her own mother. Helen only found out how serious it was in the final few months. Marcus sank into one of the leather chairs in his living room, his head in his hands. "I should have been there. Whatever happened between us, I should have been there for her. She left very specific instructions about that too," Mrs. Patterson said gently, opening her folder and withdrawing another sealed envelope. "She asked me to give you this if you expressed any regret about not being involved." With trembling hands, Marcus opened the second letter. Rebecca's handwriting was shakier. This time, clearly written during her illness, but her words were as direct as ever. "Marcus, I know you're probably angry with me for keeping the children secret, and I know you're blaming yourself for not being there during my illness. Please don't. I made the choice to walk away from you, and I made the choice to raise Emma and Ethan alone. I thought I was protecting you from more disappointment, from another failed attempt at the family we both wanted so desperately. I was wrong. The children are the best thing that ever came from our love, and they deserve to know their father. Please don't let my mistakes rob you of the chance to be the amazing parent I know you can be." Marcus read the letter 3 times, each pass bringing fresh waves of grief, anger, and forgiveness. Rebecca had made choices he didn't understand, had kept secrets that changed everything, but she had also given him the greatest gift imaginable. Somewhere in this house, his children were discovering the home that could be theirs, and he was being given a second chance at the dream that had once seemed impossible. The sound of running footsteps and delighted laughter drifted down from the upper floor, and Marcus felt his heart respond to the sound of life filling his empty halls. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever legal hurdles and lifestyle changes awaited him, he knew he couldn't let these children slip away. They were his family, the family he had been meant to have all along. Mrs. Patterson was studying his face carefully. "The state will need to do a full evaluation, of course. Background checks, home studies, interviews. The process usually takes several months." "Several months?" Marcus's voice sharpened. "Where will they stay during that time?" "Typically, with foster families, though in cases where a biological parent is involved and willing, temporary custody arrangements can sometimes be made. It would depend on the judge's discretion and the results of the preliminary evaluations." Marcus stood up, his decision crystallizing with each word. "I want full custody. I want to start the process immediately." "Are you certain? This is a life-changing decision, Mr. Blackwood. These children have been through trauma, losing their mother and facing uncertainty about their future. They'll need stability, patience, and a complete commitment to their well-being." "They're my children," Marcus said firmly. "They should be with their father." As if summoned by his words, Emma and Ethan appeared at the top of the staircase, their faces glowing with excitement. "Marcus," Emma called out, her voice echoing through the large space. "You have to see the game room. It has everything." And the view from upstairs is amazing," Ethan added. "You can see the whole city." Marcus looked up at them, these two small beings who had appeared at his ex-wife's funeral, and turned his entire world upside down with just a few simple words. They looked so small against the grandeur of the house, yet somehow they made the space feel more complete than it ever had before. "Coming," he called back, and for the first time in years, Marcus Blackwood felt like he was truly home. As he climbed the stairs toward his children, Marcus couldn't help but think that Rebecca had orchestrated one final surprise from beyond the grave. She had given him everything he had ever wanted, wrapped in a mystery that would change his life forever. The twins might have inherited her eyes and his nose, but they had brought something entirely their own into his world: hope. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows as Marcus joined Emma and Ethan in exploring the house that would soon become their home. There would be challenges ahead, questions to answer, and a family to build from scratch. But as he watched, his children point out their favorite rooms and make plans for where their belongings would go, Marcus knew that every difficult day would be worth it for moments like these. In the distance, beyond the mountains that framed his property, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. But inside the house, surrounded by the sound of children's laughter for the first time in its existence, everything felt perfect. The twins had found their father, and Marcus had found his family. Rebecca's final gift was complete. The following 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of paperwork, interviews, and home inspections that left Marcus feeling like his entire life was under a microscope. Social workers arrived unannounced to evaluate his living situation. Psychologists conducted lengthy assessments to determine his fitness as a parent, and lawyers presented him with stacks of documents that seemed to multiply. Overnight, through it all, Emma and Ethan remained in temporary foster care with the Hendersons, a kind elderly couple who specialized in emergency placements for children awaiting permanent homes. Marcus visited them every day, driving the 40-minute route to their suburban neighborhood with a mixture of anticipation and heartbreak. The Hendersons' modest ranch house was warm and welcoming, filled with the comfortable clutter of a home that had seen decades of love and laughter. Mrs. Henderson always had fresh cookies waiting, and Mr. Henderson entertained the twins with magic tricks that never failed to make them giggle. It was everything Marcus's sterile mansion wasn't, and watching his children thrive in that environment only reinforced his determination to make his own home worthy of them. During one particularly difficult visit, Emma had looked up at him with those penetrating green eyes and asked, "Why can't you just take us home with you today?" The innocent question had nearly broken his heart, because he didn't have an answer that a 7-year-old could understand. How could he explain the complexities of custody law, the bureaucratic maze that stood between a father and his children, the seemingly endless evaluations designed to determine if he was worthy of the family he had never known he had? Dr. Margaret Chen, the court-appointed psychologist, had been particularly thorough in her assessments. She spent hours with Marcus, probing into his childhood, his marriage to Rebecca, his feelings about sudden fatherhood, and his plans for integrating two children into a lifestyle that had been carefully constructed around solitude and work. Her questions were insightful but invasive, forcing him to examine aspects of himself he had long avoided. "Tell me about your relationship with your own father," she had said during their third session, her pen poised over a yellow legal pad that seemed to catalogue his every response. Marcus had shifted uncomfortably in the leather chair across from her desk. "My father was a successful businessman. He taught me the importance of hard work and financial responsibility." "That's what he did," Dr. Chen had pressed gently. "I'm asking about your relationship with him. Did you feel close to him? Did he show affection? Did you share activities together?" The questions had forced Marcus to confront truths he had spent years avoiding. His father had been distant, more comfortable expressing love through expensive gifts than physical affection or quality time. Their relationship had been built on achievement and expectations rather than emotional connection. It was a pattern Marcus feared he might repeat with Emma and Ethan, despite his best intentions. "I want to be different," he had admitted to Dr. Chen. "I want to be the kind of father who knows his children's favorite foods, who helps with homework, who shows up to school plays and soccer games. I never had that growing up, and I don't want Emma and Ethan to feel that same emptiness." Dr. Chen had made a note, then looked up with an expression that might have been approval. "That awareness is an important first step, Mr. Blackwood. But wanting to be different and actually being different are two separate things. Parenting is about consistency, patience, and putting your children's needs before your own desires. Are you prepared for that level of sacrifice?" The question had haunted Marcus for days afterward. Was he prepared to sacrifice the freedom and flexibility that had defined his adult life? Could he transform from a workaholic businessman into a present, engaged father? The uncertainty gnawed at him, particularly when he witnessed the way the Hendersons interacted with Emma and Ethan, their natural understanding of what the children needed before they even asked for it. Meanwhile, his investigation into Rebecca's hidden life continued to yield disturbing revelations. Through conversations with Mrs. Patterson and visits to Helen Morrison in the hospital, Marcus began to piece together the story of the woman he thought he had known completely. Rebecca had been far more complex than he had realized, carrying secrets and making decisions that seemed increasingly inexplicable the more he learned about them. Helen Morrison was a frail woman in her 70s, confined to a hospital bed, but mentally sharp despite her physical deterioration. When Marcus first visited her, her reaction had been a mixture of surprise and something that looked almost like guilt. She had known about his existence throughout the twins' entire lives, but had respected Rebecca's wishes to keep him uninformed. She was terrified, Helen had explained during one of their difficult conversations, her voice barely above a whisper, due to her weakened condition. "Not of you, but of what involving you might mean for the children. Rebecca had convinced herself that you would be better off without them, that she was protecting everyone by keeping the secret." Marcus had gripped the plastic hospital chair until his knuckles turned white. Protecting everyone from what? From happiness? From family? Helen's eyes had filled with tears. From disappointment. Rebecca never got over the fertility struggles you both went through. Even after the twins were born, she was convinced that something would go wrong, that she would lose them somehow. She thought if you never knew about them, you couldn't be hurt if something happened. The twisted logic of Rebecca's reasoning had left Marcus speechless. She had robbed him of 7 years with his children because she was afraid of hypothetical future pain. She had denied Emma and Ethan their father because she couldn't bear the thought of him losing them. It was simultaneously the most selfless and selfish thing he could imagine. "There's more," Helen had continued, her gaze dropping to the thin hospital blanket covering her legs. Rebecca wasn't just afraid of disappointing you, she was afraid of not being enough for the children herself. After you divorced, she went through a period of severe depression. She barely functioned for months. When she found out she was pregnant, she saw it as a chance to start over, to prove she could be the mother she felt she had failed to be as a wife. The revelation had hit Marcus like a physical blow. Rebecca had been struggling with depression during their divorce, and he had been too caught up in his own pain to notice. He had failed her when she needed him most, and she had compounded that failure by keeping their children secret. It was a cycle of hurt and misunderstanding that had cost them all precious time they could never recover. As the custody evaluation progressed, Marcus found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about parenting, about family, about himself. The twins visited his house several more times, always accompanied by Mrs. Patterson or another social worker, and each visit brought new challenges. Emma had a meltdown when she couldn't find her favorite stuffed animal, and Marcus had stood helplessly in his pristine living room, completely unprepared for the raw emotion of a grieving 7-year-old. Ethan had nightmares about his mother and grandmother dying, and Marcus had no idea how to comfort a child experiencing trauma beyond his comprehension. During one particularly difficult afternoon, both children had broken down simultaneously, overwhelmed by the uncertainty of their situation and the grief they were still processing. Marcus had found himself on the floor of his game room, holding 2 sobbing children and feeling more helpless than he ever had in his life. All his wealth and success meant nothing in the face of their pain, and he had no tools to fix what was broken in their young hearts. "I want Mommy," Emma had sobbed against his chest, her small body shaking with the force of her grief. "I know, sweetheart," Marcus had whispered, his own voice thick with emotion. "I want her back too." It was the first time he had allowed himself to acknowledge his own grief over Rebecca's death. Despite their divorce, despite the years of separation and silence, he had never stopped loving her. Learning about her struggle with illness, about her efforts to protect him even in death, had reopened wounds he thought had healed. He was mourning not just the woman he had lost, but the family they could have been if they had found a way to communicate better, to trust each other more completely. The breakthrough in his custody case came from an unexpected source. Dr. Chen requested a joint session with Marcus and the twins, ostensibly to observe their interaction in a controlled environment. Marcus had approached the meeting with his usual business mindset, prepared to present his best case for why he should be granted custody. Instead, the session became a raw, honest conversation about loss, family, and the future they all hoped to build together. "What do you miss most?" "About your mom?" Dr. Chen had asked Emma during the session. Emma had thought for a long moment, her small brow furrowed in concentration. "She always knew what we needed before we asked for it. Like when I was sad, she would make hot chocolate and put extra marshmallows in it. And when Ethan had bad dreams, she would sit by his bed and tell him stories about brave nights until he fell asleep. Those are beautiful memories," Dr. Chen had said gently. "What about you, Ethan? What do you miss about your mom?" "She hugged us a lot," Ethan had replied simply. "Even when she was sick and it was hard for her to move around, she always had hugs for us, and she smelled like flowers." Marcus had felt tears threatening as he listened to his children describe the mother he had never really known. Rebecca had been loving and attentive with Emma and Ethan in ways she had struggled to be in their marriage. She had found her calling. As a mother, had discovered parts of herself that their relationship had never brought to light. "Marcus," Dr. Chen had said, turning her attention to him, "what do you think Emma and Ethan need most right now?" The question had seemed so obvious that Marcus had almost dismissed it. But something in Dr. Chen's expression made him consider his answer more carefully. They need stability, security. They need to know they're safe and loved. Those are important things, Dr. Chen had agreed. But I think there's something even more fundamental they need. They need to grieve. They need someone who understands that healing takes time, that there will be setbacks and difficult days. They need a parent who won't try to fix their sadness, but will sit with them in it. Her words had resonated deeply with Marcus, forcing him to confront his own approach to the children's emotional needs. He had been so focused on providing them with material comfort and security that he had overlooked the more complex work of helping them process their loss. He couldn't bring Rebecca back, couldn't undo the trauma they had experienced, but he could be present for them as they navigated their grief. The session had continued with Dr. Chen guiding them through exercises designed to explore their ability to communicate and connect. She had them draw pictures of their ideal family, play simple games that required cooperation, and answer questions about their hopes and fears for the future. Throughout it all, Marcus had been struck by the twins' resilience and emotional intelligence. Despite everything they had been through, they remained hopeful, loving children who desperately wanted to belong somewhere. "Marcus," Emma had said near the end of the session, "if you become our dad, will you love us even when we're sad?" The question had nearly undone him. "Emma, I already love you, both of you. And yes, I'll love you when you're sad, when you're happy, when you're angry, and when you're scared. That's what parents do. Even if we make mistakes," Ethan had added. "Especially when you make mistakes," Marcus had assured him. "That's when you need love the most." Dr. Chen had observed the entire exchange with careful attention, making notes that Marcus hoped would be favorable to his case. But more importantly, the conversation had marked a turning point in his relationship with Emma and Ethan. They had begun to see him not just as the man their mother had told them about, but as someone who could potentially fill the enormous hole left by her absence. The weeks that followed brought gradual progress in the custody proceedings. Marcus underwent additional evaluations, submitted to more interviews, and made modifications to his home to better accommodate children. He installed safety gates, child-proofed cabinets, and converted one of his spare bedrooms into a colorful space that could serve as a playroom. He hired a decorator who specialized in child-friendly environments, and together they transformed the sterile mansion into something that felt more like a home. But the most significant change wasn't physical. It was in Marcus himself. He began reading books about child psychology and grief counseling, educating himself about the emotional needs of children who had experienced trauma. He attended a support group for single parents, where he learned practical strategies for everything from bedtime routines to discipline techniques. Most importantly, he started seeing his own therapist to work through his feelings about Rebecca's death, his resentment over the lost years, and his fears about becoming the father Emma and Ethan deserved. The therapy sessions were difficult but necessary. Marcus had to confront his own childhood experiences, acknowledging the ways his father's emotional distance had shaped his understanding of masculinity and family relationships. He had to examine his marriage to Rebecca with honest eyes, accepting his role in their communication failures and the pain that had driven them apart. Most challenging of all, he had to forgive Rebecca for her choices, recognizing that her decision to keep the children secret had come from love, even if it was misguided. Forgiveness isn't about excusing what someone did, his therapist had explained during one particularly difficult session. It's about releasing the anger that's poisoning your ability to move forward. You can forgive Rebecca for keeping the twins secret while still acknowledging that it caused tremendous pain. The process of forgiveness was gradual and complicated by the ongoing custody proceedings. Every court hearing, every evaluation, every delay in the system served as a reminder of how different things might have been if Rebecca had trusted him with the truth from the beginning. But Marcus was learning to separate his grief over the lost years from his excitement about the future he could still build with Emma and Ethan. The twins, meanwhile, were adjusting to their temporary situation with the resilience that seemed to characterize children facing impossible circumstances. They had started at a new school near the Hendersons' house, and according to their teachers, they were bright, well-behaved students who showed remarkable maturity for their age. They talked openly about their mother's death, their uncertainty, about the future, and their growing relationship with Marcus. Their counselor reported that they were processing their grief in healthy ways and expressed genuine excitement about the possibility of living with their father. During one of his visits to the Hendersons' house, Marcus had arrived to find Emma and Ethan working on a school project about family trees. They had drawn elaborate diagrams showing their connection to Rebecca and Helen, but there was a conspicuous, blank space where their father's information should have been. "We didn't know what to put for you," Emma had explained apologetically. "We know your name and where you live, but we don't know things like your birthday or your favorite color or what you do for work." The realization that his children knew almost nothing about him had been sobering. They knew he was their father, but they didn't know him as a person. He had spent weeks learning about their personalities, preferences and needs, but he had shared very little about himself in return. "My birthday is September 23rd, he had told them, settling down at their small homework table. "My favorite color is blue, like the ocean, and I work with numbers and money, helping companies make good decisions about their business." "Do you like your job?" Ethan had asked, with the curious intensity that characterized his personality. Marcus had considered the question carefully. "I used to think I loved it, but I'm learning that there are more important things than work, like family." Emma had smiled at his answer and carefully written the information in the blank space on her family tree. Seeing his name connected to theirs on paper had filled Marcus with a profound sense of belonging he had never experienced before. They were his family, and he was theirs, regardless of what the courts ultimately decided. As winter deepened and the custody evaluation entered its final phases, Marcus found himself changing in ways he hadn't anticipated. His priorities shifted from business meetings and profit margins to school schedules and children's emotional needs. He started leaving work earlier to spend time with Emma and Ethan, delegating responsibilities to his staff in ways he had never been comfortable with before. His colleagues noticed the change, and while some expressed concern about his reduced focus on the company, others seemed to understand that he had discovered something more valuable than professional success. The final custody hearing was scheduled for a cold February morning, 3 months after that life-changing encounter in the cemetery. As Marcus prepared for the day that would determine his future as a father, he reflected on how much his life had changed in such a short time. He had gone from being a childless businessman, focused solely on financial achievement, to a man whose greatest hope was earning the right to tuck 2 children into bed each night. Whatever the court decided, Marcus knew that meeting Emma and Ethan had transformed him in ways that went far beyond legal custody. They had shown him a version of himself he hadn't known existed, a man capable of patience, tenderness, and unconditional love. Rebecca's final gift had been more than just revealing his children's existence. She had given him the chance to become the father he had always wanted to be, even if he hadn't realized it until now. The night before the hearing, Marcus stood. In the bedroom he had prepared for Emma and Ethan, imagining them sleeping safely under his roof. Twin beds with matching quilts, a bookshelf filled with age-appropriate stories, and a window that looked out over the swimming pool they were so excited to use. It was a room designed for children who deserved stability, love, and the chance to heal from the trauma they had endured. As he turned off the light and closed the door, Marcus whispered a promise to the empty room and to Rebecca's memory. "I won't let them down. I'll be the father they need, the father you believed I could be." Tomorrow would bring the judge's decision, but tonight Marcus Blackwood was already a father in his heart. Emma and Ethan had changed him completely, and, regardless of what the court determined, he would never be the same man he had been before their small voices called his name in that cemetery. The twins had found their father, and he had found his purpose. Now all that remained was making it official. The courthouse corridors echoed with the sound of Marcus's polished shoes against marble floors as he approached the family courtroom where his fate as a father would be determined. His attorney, David Harrison, walked beside him, carrying a briefcase filled with psychological evaluations, character references, and evidence of Marcus's transformation from workaholic bachelor to devoted father figure. The fluorescent lighting cast harsh shadows on the institutional walls, and the antiseptic smell of the building reminded Marcus of hospitals and other places where life-changing decisions were made by strangers in positions of authority. Judge Patricia Valdez had a reputation for being thorough, fair, and uncompromising when it came to child welfare cases. She had been presiding over family court for over 2 decades, and her decisions were rarely overturned on appeal. Marcus had researched her extensively, learning that she prioritized stability and emotional security over financial resources when determining custody arrangements. Her own background as a former social worker gave her unique insight into the complex dynamics of broken families and the long-term effects of custody decisions on children's development. As they entered the courtroom, Marcus spotted Emma and Ethan sitting in the gallery with Mrs. Patterson and their court-appointed advocate, a kind woman named Jennifer Walsh, who had spent considerable time getting to know the twins and understanding their preferences. The children were dressed in their best clothes, Emma wearing a navy blue dress that made her look heartbreakingly grown up, and Ethan in a button-down shirt and khakis that he kept tugging at nervously. When they saw Marcus, their faces lit up with cautious hope, and Emma raised her small hand in a tentative wave. The courtroom itself was smaller than Marcus had expected, with wood-paneled walls and rows of benches that reminded him more of a chapel than a legal venue. But the gravity of what was about to unfold made the space feel enormous. This was where his future would be decided, where a judge would determine whether he was worthy of the title he desperately wanted to claim, father. Dr. Chen entered with her thick file of evaluations and observations, nodding professionally to Marcus before taking her seat in the witness area. Her testimony would be crucial to the outcome, as she had spent more time with Marcus and the children than anyone else involved in the case. Marcus tried to read her expression for some hint of what she might recommend, but her face remained carefully neutral. Judge Valdez called the court to order with a stern voice that commanded immediate attention. She reviewed the case file briefly, then looked up at the assembled parties with the penetrating gaze of someone who had seen every possible family configuration and dysfunction imaginable. Her first order of business was to establish the basics, facts of the case, which seemed straightforward on the surface but contained layers of complexity that had taken months to unravel. "Mr. Blackwood," she began, addressing Marcus directly, "you've petitioned for full custody of Emma and Ethan Morrison, claiming paternity based on DNA evidence and documentation provided by their deceased mother, Rebecca Morrison, formerly Rebecca Blackwood. Is that correct?" Marcus rose to his feet, his voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through his body. "Yes, Your Honor. The children are mine biologically, and I want to provide them with a stable, loving home." Judge Valdez made a note, then turned. her attention to the state's representative, a social worker named Michael Torres, who had been assigned to advocate for the children's best interests, independent of any adult's preferences. "Mr. Torres, what is the state's position regarding this petition?" Torres stood, consulting his own thick file before responding. "Your Honor, while we don't dispute Mr. Blackwood's paternity or his sincere desire to parent these children, we have concerns about the dramatic lifestyle change this would represent for all parties involved. The children have experienced significant trauma with the loss of their mother and the uncertainty surrounding their living situation. Mr. Blackwood, despite his good intentions, has no practical experience with parenting and would be taking on the full-time care of 2 grieving 7-year-olds. The words stung, but Marcus forced himself to remain calm. He had expected opposition from the state, knew that social workers were trained to be cautious about placements that seemed too good to be true. A wealthy businessman suddenly discovering he had children and wanting to take them home immediately probably raised red flags in their systematic approach to child welfare. Judge Valdez called Dr. Chen to the stand first, and Marcus held his breath as the psychologist was sworn in. Her testimony would likely carry more weight than anyone else's, given her extensive evaluation process and professional expertise in family dynamics. She settled into the witness chair with the calm confidence of someone who had testified in similar cases countless times before. "Dr. Chen, you've conducted a comprehensive psychological evaluation of Mr. Blackwood and his interaction with the children in question. What are your findings?" Dr. Chen opened her file and spoke with the measured tone of a professional delivering carefully considered conclusions. "Your Honor, I've spent approximately 30 hours in direct observation and evaluation with Mr. Blackwood and the children, both individually and together. My assessment reveals a man who has undergone significant personal growth during this process and who demonstrates genuine commitment to the children's well-being," she continued, detailing Marcus's participation in therapy, his efforts to educate himself about child development and trauma, and his willingness to make substantial changes to his lifestyle and priorities. She described his interaction with Emma and Ethan as patient, responsive, and increasingly intuitive as he learned to read their emotional needs. "However," Dr. Chen added, and Marcus felt his stomach clench, "I do have concerns about the adjustment period. Mr. Blackwood is essentially starting from zero in terms of practical parenting experience. The children, while they've expressed desire to live with their biological father, are also dealing with complex grief and attachment issues that will require ongoing professional support." Judge Valdez leaned forward slightly. "In your professional opinion, Dr. Chen, would placement with Mr. Blackwood be in the children's best interests?" Dr. Chen paused for what felt like an eternity before answering. "Yes, Your Honor, with conditions. I recommend a gradual transition period with continued counseling for all 3 family members, regular check-ins with social services for the first year, and a strong support system to help Mr. Blackwood navigate the practical challenges of sudden single parenthood." Marcus felt a surge of hope mixed with nervousness about the conditions she had outlined. He was willing to accept any requirements if they meant he could bring Emma and Ethan home, but the mention of ongoing supervision reminded him that earning custody was just the beginning of proving himself as a father. The next witness was Helen Morrison, who had been transported from the hospital in a wheelchair to provide testimony about Rebecca's wishes and the children's background. Her appearance was shocking. She looked frailer than when Marcus had visited her just a week earlier, and her voice was barely above a whisper. But her mental clarity remained sharp as she answered questions about her daughter's decision to keep the children's paternity secret and her eventual choice to reveal Marcus's identity. "Mrs. Morrison, Did your daughter Rebecca express her wishes regarding the children's father? Judge Valdez asked gently. Helen's eyes filled with tears as she replied. Rebecca regretted keeping Marcus away from the children. In her final weeks, she talked constantly about how different things might have been if she had trusted him with the truth from the beginning. She was adamant that Emma and Ethan should know their father, and that he should have the chance to be the parent she knew he could be. The testimony was powerful, but Marcus could see the skepticism in some faces around the courtroom. It was convenient that Rebecca's wishes aligned perfectly with what Marcus wanted, and he understood why some might question whether Helen was telling the complete truth or perhaps projecting her own desires onto her deceased daughter's memory. Mrs. Patterson was called next to testify about the children's current placement and their expressed preferences. She described their adjustment to the Henderson household as positive but temporary, noting that both Emma and Ethan frequently asked when they could go home with Marcus. She also detailed their behavior during visits to his house, observing that they seemed comfortable and happy in his presence. The children have been remarkably resilient, Mrs. Patterson testified. They've maintained good grades in school, participated in counseling sessions willingly, and formed healthy attachments to their temporary caregivers. However, they've also been very clear about their desire to live with their biological father. They see him as their connection to their mother and their path to a permanent family. When Jennifer Walsh, the children's advocate, took the stand, Marcus found himself holding his breath again. Her job was to represent Emma and Ethan's interests, independent of what any adult wanted, and her recommendation would carry significant weight with Judge Valdez. Ms. Walsh, you've spent considerable time with Emma and Ethan. What is your assessment of their emotional state and their preferences regarding custody? Walsh spoke with the passionate conviction of someone who had dedicated her career to protecting children's rights. Your Honor, these children have endured tremendous loss, but they've also shown remarkable strength and clarity about what they need. They want stability. They want to belong somewhere permanently, and they want to honor their mother's memory by building a relationship with their father. Mr. Blackwood represents all of those things to them. Zoo. She went on to describe specific conversations she had had with the twins, their articulate expressions of hope about living with Marcus, and their understanding that the transition would involve challenges, but also opportunities for healing and growth. I believe these children have the emotional maturity to understand what they're asking for, Walsh concluded. They're not seeking a fantasy father figure who will solve all their problems. They want a real parent who will love them through their grief and help them build a new kind of normal. Marcus was called to testify on his own behalf, and as he walked to the witness stand, he felt the weight of every decision he had made over the past few months. His attorney had prepared him extensively for this moment, coaching him on how to present his case clearly and honestly while avoiding potential pitfalls that might make him appear unprepared or naive about the challenges ahead. Mr. Blackwood, why do you want custody of these children? Judge Valdez asked directly. Marcus took a deep breath, knowing that his answer to this fundamental question might determine the outcome of the entire hearing. Your Honor, Emma and Ethan are my children. I didn't know they existed until 3 months ago, but from the moment I learned about them, I knew that being their father was the most important thing I would ever do. I want to give them the love, stability, and security they deserve. I want to help them heal from losing their mother, and I want to build the family that Rebecca and I always dreamed of having. What makes you believe you're qualified to parent 2 traumatized 7-year-olds with no prior experience raising children? The question was pointed but fair, and Marcus had thought about it constantly during his preparation. I don't think anyone is ever fully qualified for parenthood, Your Honor, but I've spent the last 3 months learning everything I can about child development, trauma recovery, and what Emma and Ethan specifically need. I've worked with Dr. Chen to understand my own emotional preparation for this responsibility. Most importantly, I've gotten to know my children as individuals, and I believe I can provide them with the patient, consistent love they need to thrive. Judge Valdez asked him about his business responsibilities, his plans for childcare during work hours, his understanding of the ongoing counseling needs the children would have, and his preparedness for the behavioral challenges that often accompanied childhood grief. Marcus answered each question thoughtfully, drawing on the extensive preparation he had done and the genuine changes he had made to his lifestyle and priorities. Mr. Blackwood, the court has heard testimony suggesting that you've made significant modifications to your home and schedule to accommodate these children. Some might argue that such dramatic changes are unrealistic and unsustainable over the long term. How do you respond to that concern? Marcus felt this was perhaps the most crucial question of his testimony. Your Honor, I understand that concern, but I would argue that becoming a parent should change someone dramatically. The man I was 3 months ago, focused solely on business success and personal achievement, wasn't equipped to be anyone's father. The changes I've made aren't sacrifices. They're investments in the most important relationship I'll ever have. My children will always come first, and I'm committed to maintaining that priority for as long as they need me. After his testimony, the judge called for a brief recess before hearing final arguments. Marcus sat with his attorney in the hallway, watching Emma and Ethan color in books that Mrs. Patterson had brought to keep them occupied. They seemed remarkably calm, considering that their entire future was being decided just a few yards away. But Marcus could see the tension in their small shoulders and the way they kept glancing toward the courtroom doors. Emma approached him. During the break, climbing onto the bench beside him with the casual familiarity that had developed over their months of visits. "Are you nervous?" she asked, studying his face with those perceptive green eyes. "A little," Marcus admitted. "Are you?" She nodded solemnly. "But Mommy always said that things that are worth having are worth being nervous about. She was nervous when we were born, but she said it was the best kind of nervous because she knew something wonderful was about to happen." The simple wisdom in her words brought tears to Marcus's eyes. Even in death, Rebecca was still parenting these children, still providing them with the emotional tools they needed to navigate difficult situations. He pulled Emma closer, marveling at her resilience and maturity. "Whatever happens in there," he told her quietly, "I want you to know that meeting you and Ethan has been the most wonderful thing that's ever happened to me. You've already made me a better person, and I'll always be grateful for that." Ethan had overheard the conversation and joined them on the bench, sandwiching Marcus between the two children who had transformed his entire understanding of what mattered in life. "We're grateful too," he said with the serious tone he used when expressing important thoughts. "Mommy said you would love us, and she was right." When court reconvened for final arguments, Marcus felt a sense of peace despite the uncertainty of the outcome. Regardless of what Judge Valdez decided, he had been changed forever by these children. They had given him a purpose beyond financial success and shown him a version of himself he never knew existed. David Harrison presented Marcus's case with passionate conviction, emphasizing his client's genuine transformation, his commitment to the children's well-being, and his financial ability to provide them with every opportunity for success and healing. He argued that denying Marcus custody would be denying the children their right to be raised by their biological father, particularly when that father had proven himself willing and able to meet their needs. The state's attorney countered with, Concerns about the dramatic nature of the placement, the lack of a gradual transition period, and the potential for Marcus to become overwhelmed by the realities of full-time parenting. He suggested a more conservative approach involving extended visitation and a longer evaluation period before considering full custody. Judge Valdez listened to both arguments with the careful attention of someone who understood that her decision would affect 3 lives forever. When the attorneys finished their presentations, she announced that she would render her decision immediately rather than taking the case under advisement. This court has reviewed extensive documentation, heard testimony from multiple professionals, and observed the interactions between Mr. Blackwood and these children, she began, her voice carrying the authority of her position. While this case presents unique circumstances, the fundamental question remains the same. What arrangement will best serve the interests of Emma and Ethan Morrison? Marcus felt his heart pounding so loudly he was sure the entire courtroom could hear it. Emma and Ethan sat perfectly still in the gallery, their hands clasped together as they waited to learn their fate. The court finds that Mr. Blackwood has demonstrated genuine commitment to these children and has made substantial efforts to prepare himself for the responsibilities of parenthood. While his lack of prior experience is a concern, his willingness to seek professional guidance and make necessary lifestyle changes suggests a level of dedication that bodes well for his success as a parent. Judge Valdez continued, addressing the state's concerns about the dramatic nature of the placement while acknowledging the children's clearly expressed preferences and their biological connection to Marcus. She noted Dr. Chen's conditional recommendation and the testimony of various professionals who had observed the family's developing dynamics. However, she said, and Marcus felt his breath catch, the court shares some concerns about the immediate transition to full custody without a more gradual adjustment period. Therefore, this court grants Mr. Blackwood legal custody of Emma and Ethan Morrison, effective immediately, with the following conditions. Marcus barely heard the specific conditions through the rushing sound in his ears as the word custody echoed in his mind. He had won. He was going to take his children home. The conditions Judge Valdez outlined included ongoing family counseling, regular check-ins with social services for the first year, and a requirement that Marcus maintain the support systems he had established during the evaluation process. There were also provisions for the children to maintain contact with the Henderson family, who had become important figures in their lives during the transition period. Mr. Blackwood, Judge Valdez said, looking directly at him, you are now legally responsible for the welfare of 2 children who have experienced significant trauma and loss. This is not a decision this court has made lightly, and the children's continued well-being will be monitored closely. Do you understand and accept these responsibilities? Marcus stood, his voice strong and clear, despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. Yes, Your Honor, I understand completely, and I accept these responsibilities with gratitude and humility. Then this court awards custody of Emma and Ethan Morrison to their biological father, Marcus Blackwood, effective immediately. The gavel came down with a finality that seemed to echo through Marcus's entire being. He was a father. Legally, officially, and completely, he was Emma and Ethan's father. The courtroom erupted in quiet celebration as the twins ran to Marcus, throwing their arms around him with the abandon of children who had finally found their permanent home. Mrs. Patterson was crying, Dr. Chen was smiling, and even the bailiff looked moved by the scene unfolding before them. We get to go home. With you? Emma asked, her voice muffled against Marcus's chest. We get to go home, Marcus confirmed, his own voice thick with tears. We're a family now. The paperwork that followed was extensive, but felt ceremonial after the emotional weight of the hearing. Marcus signed document after document, each reinforcing his new legal status as Emma and Ethan's guardian and provider. Mrs. Patterson explained the transition process, the ongoing requirements, and the support services that would remain available to them as they adjusted to their new life together. Dr. Chen approached them as they prepared to leave the courthouse, her professional demeanor softened by genuine warmth. "Congratulations, Marcus. You've earned this, and I believe you're going to be an excellent father. Remember that parenting is a learning process, and it's okay to ask for help when you need it." Marcus shook her hand gratefully, knowing that her support had been crucial to the outcome. "Thank you for seeing what I could become, not just what I was." The drive home was filled with excited chatter from the back seat as Emma and Ethan discussed their plans for their first night in their new house. They wanted to cook dinner together, watch a movie, and sleep in the beds Marcus had prepared for them. Their enthusiasm was infectious, and Marcus found himself smiling more broadly than he had in years. As they pulled into the driveway of the house that was now officially their family home, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 3 months ago, he had been a successful but lonely businessman with no family and no clear purpose beyond accumulating wealth. Now he was the father of 2 remarkable children who had chosen to love him despite his inexperience and uncertainties. That first evening at home was everything Marcus had hoped it would be and more. They cooked spaghetti together, with Emma stirring the sauce and Ethan setting the table with careful precision. They watched an animated movie about a family of superheroes, and Marcus found himself laughing genuinely for the first time in months. When it came time for bed, he read them stories from the books he had selected for their room, his voice growing hoarse with emotion as he tucked them in under quilts that finally had children to keep warm. "Marcus," Emma said sleepily as he turned off the light. "Yes, sweetheart. Thank you for wanting us. Mommy said you would, but it's nice to know she was right." Marcus kissed her forehead, then moved to Ethan's bed to do the same. "Thank you for giving me the chance to be your dad. I love you both more than you'll ever know." As he stood in the doorway of their room, watching his children drift off to sleep in their own beds, in their own home, Marcus whispered a silent thank you to Rebecca. She had given him the greatest gift imaginable, and he would spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of it. The months that followed brought challenges and adjustments, just as Dr. Chen had predicted. There were nights when nightmares interrupted sleep, moments when grief overwhelmed the children's remarkable resilience, and times when Marcus questioned his ability to meet their complex emotional needs. But there were also discoveries and joys that exceeded his wildest expectations. He learned that Emma loved to bake and had inherited Rebecca's talent for creating elaborate birthday cakes. He discovered that Ethan was fascinated by astronomy and could spend hours studying star charts and learning about distant planets. Through family counseling sessions, school conferences, and the daily routine of homework and meals and bedtime stories, Marcus grew into his role as their father. The businessman who had once measured success in profit margins now found his greatest achievements in soccer games attended, scraped knees comforted, and bedtime prayers shared. Emma and Ethan thrived in their new environment, their grades improving. As their sense of security strengthened, they made friends in their new school, participated in activities that interested them, and slowly began to heal from the trauma of losing their mother. They still missed Rebecca terribly, but they had learned to carry their love for her alongside their growing love for the father who had fought so hard to bring them home. 6 months after the custody hearing, as Marcus stood on the sidelines of one of Ethan's Little League games while Emma cheered from the bleachers, he marveled at how completely his life had changed. The man who had once worked 18-hour days now left the office promptly at 5 to help with homework and cook dinner. The house that had once echoed with emptiness now rang with laughter and the constant chatter of children discovering the world around them. Rebecca's final letter had been prophetic in ways Marcus was still discovering. She had known him better than he knew himself, had seen the father he could become even when he couldn't see it himself. Her gift to him hadn't just been the revelation of his children's existence, it had been the chance to become the man he was always meant to be. As autumn returned and the anniversary of their first meeting in the cemetery approached, Marcus planned a small memorial service for Rebecca in their backyard. Emma and Ethan helped him plant a garden in her memory, choosing flowers that would bloom year after year as a reminder of the love that had created their family. They shared stories about her, looked through photo albums, and celebrated the woman whose final act of love had brought them all together. Standing in that garden with dirt under his fingernails and his children beside him, Marcus understood that some gifts come wrapped in mystery and pain, delivered by voices that call your name when you least expect them to change everything. Emma and Ethan had done exactly that on a cold morning in a cemetery, and his life had never been the same. The twins had found their father, but more importantly, Marcus Blackwood had found his family, his purpose, and himself. Rebecca's final gift was complete, and the family she had always dreamed they could be was finally beautifully real. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.